Imagine the crack of a whip, the clanking of iron chains, and the cries of people torn from their families. This is the image most of us are given when we think of slavery. But what we are not told is just as important: the resistance. From the very first encounter with slave raiders on African soil, to the brutal slave ships of the Middle Passage, and even on the plantations of the Americas, Africans fought back. They plotted, they rebelled, they fled into jungles and mountains, and in some cases, they built entire kingdoms of freedom. History books rarely tell us this side of the story. Why? Because colonizers wanted the world to believe Africans went quietly into slavery. But the truth is powerful and dangerous to those who tried to erase it. The truth is this: Africa never surrendered. This is the untold history of African resistance to slavery, a story of courage, defiance, and freedom that must never be forgotten. When we open colonial-era history books, we often find a misleading story: that Africans sold their own people freely, that slavery was just part of life, and that resistance was rare. This narrative wasn't an accident. It was designed to make the horrors of slavery look natural, even justified. Yes, some African rulers collaborated with European traders, but that's only half the story. What we are not told is that countless African kings, queens, and ordinary villagers fought desperately against enslavement. Take the Kingdom of Congo, for example. Once an ally of Portugal, the Congolese soon realized that European traders weren't just exchanging goods. They were draining the very life of Africa by stealing its people. Congo rulers, including King Garcia too, clashed with the Portuguese in bloody wars to protect their people. Resistance wasn't rare, it was constant. But colonial historians erased these battles because they didn't fit the image of Africans as helpless victims. Long before enslaved Africans reached the Americas, they resisted on their own continent. In the early 1600s, Portuguese slavers invaded Angola, expecting to dominate with their guns and ships. But they met their match in a woman. Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Nzinga was a brilliant diplomat and fierce warrior. In one famous meeting with the Portuguese governor, he refused to offer her a chair. So Nzinga ordered one of her attendants to kneel down, sat proudly on his back, and negotiated eye to eye with her enemy. That single act sent a message: I will not kneel to you. For decades, Nzinga waged war, building alliances with other African states and even the Dutch. She adopted guerrilla tactics, striking Portuguese forts and ambushing slave caravans. She turned her kingdom into a sanctuary for escaped slaves. To this day, in Angola, Queen Nzinga is remembered as a national hero, the woman who defied an empire. On the coast of modern Ghana, the Fant Confederacy formed to resist the growing power of European slave traders. They built alliances, strengthened their armies, and tried to keep their people from being captured. They knew that every slave fort along the coast was a dagger pointed at Africa's heart. In West Africa, the Kingdom of Dahomey became famous for its elite women warriors, known as the Agaji, or Dahomey Amazons. These women trained in combat, armed with muskets and blades, and defended their homeland with unmatched ferocity. While Dahomey's relationship with slavery was complex, at times resisting, at times participating, the Agaji remained a symbol of how Africans mobilized to fight European encroachment. It wasn't just kings and queens. Ordinary African villages resisted slave raids with whatever weapons they had: spears, bows, even farming tools. Many paid with their lives, but their sacrifice slowed down the machinery of slavery. If Africa was the first battlefield, the slave ships were the second. The Middle Passage was designed to break the human spirit, but often it did the opposite. Imagine hundreds of men, women, and children chained below deck in suffocating darkness. Disease spread, food was scarce, and death was constant. Yet, in this hell, hope still flickered. Historians estimate that about 1 in 10 slave ships faced uprisings. Africans used whatever they could: broken chains, nails, or bare hands, to overpower the crew. Some managed to take control of the ship, attempting to sail back to Africa. One famous case was the revolt aboard the ship Amistad in 1839, where Africans led by Sengbe P, known as Joseph Sink, overpowered their captors. Though this revolt happened later in history, it echoed a long tradition, Africans refusing to accept bondage. Others chose another form of resistance, leaping into the ocean, embracing death over slavery. European captains called this the slave's despair, but in truth, it was an act of ultimate defiance. The fight did not end when Africans were forced onto foreign soil. In fact, resistance grew stronger. In Brazil's jungles, thousands of escaped Africans formed a massive free society called Palmares. For nearly 100 years, Palmares defied Portuguese armies. At its peak, it had around 30,000 people. Led by the warrior King Zumbi dos Palmares, they built farms, schools, and defenses, proving that Africans could not only resist, but create new worlds of freedom. In Jamaica, escaped slaves became the Maroons, carving out hidden settlements in the mountains. Using guerrilla tactics and knowledge of the land, they fought the British to a standstill. Eventually, the British had no choice but to sign treaties recognizing Maroon independence. Their leader, Queen Nanny of the Maroons, became legendary. She was said to catch bullets with her hands and call on ancestral spirits in battle. Whether myth or truth, her story embodies the unstoppable spirit of African resistance. The Haitian Revolution, the most powerful example, came in Saint-Domingue, modern Haiti. In 1791, enslaved Africans, inspired by the dream of freedom, rose up in what became the Haitian Revolution. Figures like Dutty Balkman, a spiritual leader, called upon African gods for strength. Toussaint Louverture, a former slave, became a brilliant general. Jean-Jacques Dessalines carried the fight to the bitter end. Against impossible odds, they defeated the French, the Spanish, and even the mighty British. In 1804, Haiti declared independence, the first black republic, and the only nation born from a successful slave revolt. The Haitian Revolution shook the world. It terrified slaveholders everywhere, who feared their own plantations would rise in flames, and it inspired enslaved people across the Americas to keep resisting. Other rebellions, the Stono Rebellion 1739 in South Carolina, where Africans marched toward freedom shouting liberty. Gabriel's Rebellion, 1800 in Virginia, a daring plan to capture Richmond, betrayed before it began. Countless smaller uprisings in Cuba, Suriname, and beyond, each rebellion, whether it succeeded or failed, sent a clear message: we will not be broken. If Africans resisted so fiercely, why don't we learn about it in school? The answer is simple. Colonial powers controlled the writing of history. They wanted slavery to appear natural, inevitable, even necessary. To admit that Africans resisted would mean admitting that slavery was never accepted, that it was always a crime. So they silenced stories of Palmares, erased Queen Nanny, and downplayed the Haitian Revolution. They portrayed Africans as helpless, rather than as fighters. This historical erasure wasn't just an accident. It was part of the same system that justified slavery in the first place. But no matter how hard colonizers tried to erase it, the legacy survived. It survived in the songs of the enslaved spirituals that carried secret messages of freedom. It survived in food, dance, and culture, where African traditions blended with new lands. It survived in freedom fighters of later centuries who drew inspiration from past rebellions. When Africans rose up against colonial rule in the 20th century, they carried the spirit of Queen Nzinga, the Maroons, and the Haitians with them. And today, every fight for justice, dignity, and equality carries echoes of those who resisted slavery centuries ago. Freedom is stronger than chains. Slavery tried to strip Africans of their humanity. Colonial history tried to strip them of their dignity. But the truth survived. Africans resisted, again and again. From the coasts of Angola to the mountains of Jamaica, from the ships of the Atlantic to the streets of Haiti, Africans proved that freedom is stronger than chains. This is not just a story of pain. It is a story of courage. It is a story of resilience. It is a story that must never again be erased.